On February 2nd, 1986, Anita Lorraine Cobb, a 26-year-old nurse, was walking back home in the city of Blacktown. Anita had no idea, but she was being followed by 5 men. These men kidnapped her and did horrible things to her in what became known as one of the worst crimes in Australia. What is up, guys? How are you all doing? Welcome back to the Unheard-of channel. And in today's video, I am going to talk about the Anita Cobb case. Anita Lorraine Lynch was born on November 2nd, 1989, in Sydney, which is considered the most populous city in Australia. She was the daughter of Gary Bernard Lynch and Grace Lynch. Gary was a graphic artist in the Royal Australian Air Force, while Grace was a nurse. Since she was very young, Anita was described as a really pretty girl and was influenced by people close to her to pursue a career as a model. She took part in several beauty contests, in which she won most of them. The most prominent one was the Miss Western Suburbs contest, which took place in November 1979. Anita had a promising career as a model. It was just a matter of time for her to close deals with big brands and make a lot of money. But deep down, even though she liked it, that's not what Anita wanted for her life. So she ditched the modeling career and decided to follow in her mother's footsteps and become a nurse. When Anita joined the nursing course at Sydney Hospital, she met her future husband, a man named John Cobb. The two dated for a while until on March 27, 1982, they got married. After marrying, Anita left her parents' house in Blacktown and moved to Sydney with John, her spouse. She landed a job as a nurse in Sydney, and word has it she was over the moon and making all sorts of plans for the future. Blacktown, the town where Anita's parents lived, is about 21 miles away from Sydney, and whenever she could, she would go there to visit them. The marriage between Anita and John was initially going very well, just like most marriages, but after a few years, the relationship between the two started to cool down, and they ended their relationship. With the breakup, Anita left Sydney and moved back in with her parents in Blacktown. Even though they broke up, Anita and John still kept in touch. Even in a subsequent statement, John mentioned that they had a good relationship and were even considering reconciling at a later time. Even though she moved back in with her parents in Blacktown, Anita kept working as a nurse in Sydney and would commute 21 miles every day to her job. On February 2nd, 1986, the day started off as usual for Anita. She woke up early, took a shower, had breakfast, and then got ready to go to work. At Sydney Hospital, where she studied to become a nurse, Anita worked her shift until 3 in the afternoon, already at her job. Later, she met up with some friends, and they all went out for dinner in Redfern, a suburb that is situated to the south of Sydney. After having dinner, Anita said goodbye to her friends and then went to the Central Railway Station, where she caught a train that took her to Blacktown Station. Anita arrived at Blacktown Station at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening. She typically contacted her father to request a ride, but on that particular day, the payphone she usually utilized was out of order, rendering her unable to reach her dad. Anita went to a taxi stand that was nearby the station to see if she could find any cabbie who could give her a ride back to her place of residence. However, on that very day, there was not a solitary taxi driver working. Due to that, Anita made the decision that she would walk home. But what she didn't know was that she would never be able to complete her journey. Anita was being checked out by a bunch of dudes, 5 in total, ever since she got off at Blacktown Station. The individuals in question were John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and the Murphy siblings, Michael, Gary, and Les. All of them are well known to the authorities and are regarded as dangerous criminals by law enforcement. The 5 of them were in a stolen car and started following Anita without her noticing. At some point, they stopped the car right next to her, and 2 of the 5 men got out and dragged her into the vehicle. Anita tried to fight against the 2 guys. She kicked and screamed, but they were stronger, and managed to overpower her and put her in the car. While she was being dominated by them, a family who lived in a nearby house heard Anita's screams and went out into the street to see what was happening. This family consisted of a 16-year-old teenager, his mother, and his younger sister. They witnessed the exact moment when the two guys were dragging Anita into the car, and upon seeing that, the teenager ran to try to help her. However, the criminals were faster, and after successfully placing Anita inside the vehicle, they accelerated and escaped from the scene. The family returned back inside the house and contacted the police to report what had just occurred. Upon being informed, the police began searching for the criminal's vehicle, which was a white HT Holden Kingswood. Shortly after, a neighbor of the family who witnessed the crime was informed by him about what had happened, and he decided to lend a hand by taking his car to search for the criminals. That neighbor drove on the Ring Road, which is currently recognized as Peter Brock Drive. He arrived at a paddock, a place where horse races are apparently held, which seemed abandoned. He got out of the car and with a flashlight, he started searching the area for the criminals. The place was big and there was a lot of bush, so the man couldn't search everything alone. He looked as far as he could around the place, and then, without hope and believing that the criminals were not present, he decided to make his way back home. But incredibly, what he didn't know was that the criminals were there. They were hiding in a part of the paddock where there was a lot of tall grass, which helped hide their vehicle. While the man was looking for them, they covered Anita's mouth so she wouldn't scream, and everyone remained silent inside the car. They saw practically every step the man took while he searched for them in the paddock, as he was using a flashlight in a completely dark place, and this gave away his position. After the man left, the criminals initiated what would eventually be known as one of the most heinous crimes in the history of Australia. Anita, already knowing that the worst awaited her, begged them to let her go, saying that she was married and on her periods. But they didn't want to know and started attacking her in the worst possible way and forced her to have intimate relations with each of them. Afterwards, the criminals decided to go to a gas station to buy fuel, drinks, and cigarettes with the money stolen from Anita. Upon leaving the station, they returned to the paddock where they had left Anita tied up, and as soon as they arrived at the scene, they continued the crime. Anita suffered every type of violence you can imagine. In the end, John Travers, one of the criminals, was worried that Anita might recognize them, and so convinced the other criminals that the best thing to do was to take her life. John, armed with a sharp weapon, made a deep cut in Anita's throat, which was enough for her to die. After committing the crime, the 5 criminals returned to the vehicle and drove away. Meanwhile, the police had been searching since the time the family informed them about what they had seen, but they were unable to find the criminals. When Anita didn't return home that night, her parents initially thought she had slept at a friend's house, so they weren't worried. But the next day, when Anita didn't show up for work, her parents realized that something was very wrong and decided to report it to the authorities. On the morning of February 4th, 1986, a farmer was walking through the paddock because some of his cows had escaped and gone to that area. While walking, the farmer observed what appeared to be a female body in close proximity to a fence made of barbed wire. As he approached, he saw that it was indeed a female body and that she was naked. Very scared, he immediately reported it to the police. As soon as the cops arrived at the scene, they quickly identified the body as Anita Cobby's. This was only possible thanks to the wedding ring she wore, on which the names of her and her ex-husband John, with whom she intended to reconcile, were engraved. No other items such as documents or even Anita's bag were found at the scene. If it weren't for the ring, the recognition would take a little longer. In testimony, the farmer told the police that on the night Anita disappeared, he heard a woman's screams coming from the paddock, which is a few meters from his property. He said he didn't go to check as it was common for teenagers to go to the place to have parties and mess, and he thought it was just that. After searching the entire area for any evidence that could lead them to those responsible for the crime, authorities sent Anita's body for an autopsy. The autopsy report indicated that Anita suffered greatly while in the hands of the criminals. According to the report, she also had several scratches, cuts, and lacerations all over her body, especially on her breasts. She had 2 black and swollen eyes, a broken nose, and 2 broken cheekbones. Along with the self-defense wounds, she also had a finger that split open completely, from the tip of the finger to the hand, likely from defending herself. On the same hand, there were several broken fingers, and on the other hand, several fingers were completely cut off. It is believed that this happened due to Anita's desperate attempt to wrestle the sharp weapon from her attacker's hands. The autopsy report concluded that the cause of death was due to the deep cut in the victim's throat. Despite all these horrible things, there's something that made everything even worse. The autopsy also revealed that the victim, Anita Cobby, was a few weeks pregnant. When Anita's parents were informed of what had happened to her, they were completely devastated. Later, the news about the crime, along with some details about it, were released by the media, which caused fear and great anger among the country's population. Anita Cobby's funeral took place on February 10, 1986, at Pine Grove Eastern Creek in Sydney. The farewell ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, including family, friends, and co-workers. She was later buried at Pine Grove Memorial Park. John Cobby, Anita's ex-husband, was the first suspect the police investigated. However, he had a good alibi and was soon ruled out by the police. It is said that John was very shaken by what had happened to Anita. The population of the country, and especially of Blacktown, were afraid and angry, as I already mentioned. But this got worse when Anita Cobby's full autopsy report was leaked to the media and was presented live during a morning radio show. People were shocked to learn about all the suffering the victim went through, and the authorities, who were already under pressure to respond to society, came under even more pressure. As a result, the state government offered a reward of 50,000 Australian dollars to anyone who had information that could lead the authorities to the criminals. Subsequently, the police reconstructed all of Anita's steps on the night of the crime. To do this, they dressed a female police officer named Debbie Wallace in clothes similar to Anita's. Debbie took the same route Anita had taken that night when she caught the train back to Blacktown. The police hoped that this would activate the memory of possible witnesses who were nearby, and that they could provide valuable information about the criminals. The police also spoke to several passengers who were taking the same train at the same time as Anita, but despite all this effort, no one had seen anything that could help the police. A few days later, police received an anonymous tip about a stolen HT Holden Kingswood vehicle. The police went to the address mentioned in the complaint to find out if it was real. Upon arriving at the scene, they managed to locate the stolen vehicle, and along with that, they arrested 3 of the 5 criminals: John Travers, Michael Murdoch, and Les Murphy.
Up to now, the police had not made a connection between the stolen vehicle and the vehicle used in the crime against Anita. The vehicle, as we already know, was the same, but the police didn't know, and the report they responded to was because the vehicle was stolen. With that, Michael Murdoch and Les Murphy were seen by the police and later released on bail. John Travers has already been kept in custody because he has a history of violent crimes.
With John Travers in custody, some police officers began to connect the dots and began to suspect that he might have participated in the crime against Anita Cobby. The police then decided to question him about it, and John ended up showing some nervousness and gave conflicting statements about where he was on the night of the crime. This obviously made the police even more suspicious, and they decided they would investigate John further. In the meantime, while John Travers was in custody, he asked police officers to tell a friend of his that he wanted cigarettes. John gave this friend's phone number to the police, and that's when the authorities had an idea. as they suspected that John had participated in the crime, but still did not have any concrete evidence that could incriminate him. They decided to ask this friend of the criminal for help. The police contacted her through the phone number that John Travers himself gave them and discovered that the woman was actually his aunt. The police officers spoke to her and explained the entire situation. They talked about Anita Cobby, how she was a dedicated nurse and had her whole life ahead of her. They talked about the distrust they had regarding her nephew, and given the record he had, there was a good chance he was linked to the crime.
At last, the police requested her aid, stating she could assist in serving justice and they needed her help. The woman, who received the pseudonym of Miss X for safety reasons, agreed to help the cops. From this point on, a plan began to be devised to extract a confession from John and the other criminals. The authorities made the decision that Miss X should wear a wire and have a conversation with the criminals regarding the crime. As John Travers had requested a cigarette from her, the police officers saw a wonderful opportunity for her to engage in a conversation with him. So the woman went to the prison where John was detained to bring the cigarettes. There, the two started talking, and when she asked about Anita Cobby, John Travers confessed to the crime and everything was recorded. Later, the police officers requested the woman to do the same thing with Michael Murdoch. So then, with a bug, she went to his house, and in conversation, Michael Murdoch also confessed the crime, and even said that the Murph brothers had also participated. Everything was recorded.
Through these confessions, the police obtained arrest warrants for the 4 criminals who were still at large. With that, John Travers, Michael Murdoch, Michael Murphy, Gary Murphy, and Les Murphy were formally charged with the crime against Anita Cobby. In addition to this crime, they were also accused of several others, such as vehicle theft, burglary, possession of narcotics, and invasion.
In total, it took 22 days from the day of the crime until the responsible individuals were arrested. The police even received praise from the community at the time for having solved the crime in less than a month. Now, prior to proceeding to trial, I am going to discuss briefly about each of the offenders to provide additional support to this case. Let's initiate with John Travers, the most dreadful of them.
John was 18 years old at the time of the events, but despite his young age, he was the leader of the group and considered the most cruel. When he was born, his parents were still teenagers and didn't have a serious commitment. His family was very poor, and he was the oldest of 8 siblings. At just 14 years old, John was already addicted to alcohol and was expelled from school and high school for bad behavior. Later, because it was too much work, he was sent to a juvenile detention center by his own mother. Upon leaving that center, he was tasked with, as the eldest son, supporting the family since his father had abandoned them. John then started stealing to get money to support his family, and from then on, he never left the criminal life. Around this same time, John's mother, who developed mental problems, began to deteriorate. Therefore, she was considered incapable of caring for her 8 children, and John, along with his brothers, were sent to foster homes, while his mother was sent to a hospice. John not only took pleasure in stealing, he also took pleasure in hurting any living being. According to sources, he stole animals to eat, but before taking their lives, he forced relations with these animals and then had relations again with them already dead. John Travers is undoubtedly a disturbed and cruel man. Michael Murdoch was 19 years old at the time of the events. He was John's childhood friend and criminal partner from an early age. He spent much of his life in juvenile prisons, and when he got out, like John, he embraced the world of crime. The Murphy brothers, Michael, Gary, and Les, are 3 brothers from a family of 9 children. Michael Murphy was 33 years old at the time of the crime, and according to sources, he was sent to live with his grandmother when he was 12, and even spent time in a juvenile prison. Upon his arrest, it was discovered that he had escaped from Silverwater Correctional Center, where he was serving a 25-year sentence for various crimes. Gary Murphy was 28 years old.
A hearing impairment affected his ability to learn at school, and because of this, he decided to stop studying to look for work. He was described as a hard-working man with a good future ahead of him, but his great interest in cars led to him joining a car theft ring and facing several charges for doing so. Les Murphy was 22 years old at the time of the crime. He was the youngest in the Murphy family and was known for having the worst temper. He spent a lot of time in juvenile prisons, and after getting out, he faced several charges for robbery.
The trial of the 5 defendants commenced on March 16, 1987, in a courtroom located in Sydney. All things considered, the trial spanned a grand total of 54 days, and there was not a lot that the defense of the accused could do.
On June 16, 1987, John Travers, Michael Murdoch, Michael Murphy, Gary Murphy, and Les Murphy were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the crime against Anita Cobby. At the time, the judge responsible for the case said that this was one of the worst crimes he had ever seen, and that each of those responsible deserved the same degree of mercy that they granted the victim. With the end of the trial, not only Anita's family but also a large part of the population were relieved and satisfied. A few years later, Gary and Grace Lynch, Anita's parents, joined forces with Peter and Christine Simpson to create a support group for families of victims of heinous crimes. Peter and Christine Simpson were the parents of Ebony Simpson, a 9-year-old girl who was the victim of a crime in 1992, similar to Anita Cobby's crime. Gary Lynch passed away on September 14, 2008, aged 90, suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Grace Lynch passed away from lung cancer in 2013, aged 88. The couple was together for 54 years. According to sources, John Travers is an extremely troubled inmate. He has been involved in several fights with other inmates and has also tried to escape once. Because of this, he is currently in the Wellington Correctional Center in maximum security. Michael Murdoch is currently incarcerated at the Lithgow Correctional Center, also in maximum security. Michael Murphy was initially housed at the Long Bay Correctional Complex in maximum security. He was then sent to a special protection unit in the same complex, where he spent some time with his brother Gary. In 2018, he was transferred to another unit due to health problems. In February 2019, Michael Murphy passed away from cancer at Long Bay Hospital at the age of 66. Gary Murphy was housed for a while with his brother Michael in the Special Protection Unit at the Long Bay Correctional Complex, as I already mentioned. In 2019, he was severely assaulted by several other inmates while showering in the shower block. He was transferred to a hospital in critical condition but survived. He is currently incarcerated at the Goulburn Correctional Center in maximum security. Les Murphy, on the other hand, is also incarcerated at the Goulburn Correctional Center and also in maximum security. The crime against Anita Cobby is considered one of the worst crimes in Australia and had a huge impact at the time. The case has been the subject of numerous true crime television series, as well as several books. A park located on Sullivan Street in Blacktown was named Anita Cobby Reserve in honor of Anita's memory.
And that was today's video. Thank you very much for watching me up until this point, and I will see you in the next video.